The artificial gravity hiccuped just as Ambassador Marcus Chen stepped off the transport, sending his carefully organized diplomatic briefcase tumbling through the air like a confused metal bird. Papers scattered in zero-G, floating around the docking bay like oversized confetti, while Marcus flailed helplessly after them. "Welcome to Nexus Prime," announced the station's AI in a tone that suggested it had witnessed this exact scenario roughly 12,000 times before. "Please mind the gravitational adjustment period, and your dignity." Marcus managed to snag his security clearance just before it drifted into a recycling chute. "Thanks for the heads up," he muttered, then louder. "I meant to do that." It's a traditional Earth greeting, very interpretive. The Zephyrian escort waiting for him, a tall being with skin like polished silver and those distinctive elongated ears that twitched with what Marcus hoped was amusement rather than contempt, remained diplomatically silent. "Ambassador Chen," the escort said finally, "I am Kethvar, attaché to Her Majesty Queen Lyrelei. The opening ceremonies begin in 1 standard hour." "Perfect. Just enough time for me to make 17 more embarrassing first impressions." Marcus stuffed the last of his papers back into his case, noting how Kethvar's ears had pivoted slightly forward. Either that was interest, or the Zephyrian equivalent of rolling one's eyes. They glided through corridors that defied several laws of physics Marcus thought he understood. The walls seemed to breathe with bioluminescent patterns, while gravity shifted subtly with each section, making walking feel like a constant dance with invisible partners. "First time on a living station?" Kethvar asked. "Living?" Marcus's voice cracked slightly. "You mean this thing is alive?" "Nexus Prime is a hybrid biomechanical construct. The Verdani grew the basic structure, the mechanists installed the systems, and the psychers linked the consciousness matrix. It's perfectly safe. Mostly." "Mostly." "Well, last week it developed what your species might call a sense of humor. It's been playing practical jokes on visiting dignitaries ever since." As if summoned by the conversation, a section of floor suddenly became transparent beneath Marcus's feet, revealing the vast emptiness of space below. He yelped and jumped sideways, directly into a wall that had definitely not been there a second before. "Station," Kethvar sighed, "please maintain standard opacity protocols during escort duties." A warm chuckle resonated from the walls themselves. "Apologies, Kethvar. The human's biometric readings indicated elevated stress levels. I thought levity might help." "Levity?" Marcus groaned, peeling himself off what he now realized was a cushioned safety barrier. "Right, because nothing reduces stress like sudden existential terror." "I find your species fascinatingly paradoxical," the station mused. "You use humor to cope with fear, yet fear your own humor. Most intriguing." They emerged into the grand assembly chamber, and Marcus's sarcastic retort died in his throat. The space was vast beyond comprehension, its crystalline walls revealing the star field beyond while somehow maintaining breathable atmosphere. Delegates from dozens of species filled floating platforms arranged in a complex three-dimensional spiral that hurt to look at directly. The seating arrangement represents the political relationships between member species, Kethvar explained. "Your delegation is positioned, optimistically." Marcus spotted the human platform hovering near what appeared to be the diplomatic equivalent of the children's table, wedged between what looked like a delegation of sentient mushrooms and a group of beings that seemed to be made entirely of very judgmental light. Optimistically. Right. He adjusted his tie, a nervous habit that had gotten him through 3 years of interplanetary law school and 2 disastrous attempts at dating within his own species. "Any advice for not accidentally starting an interstellar incident?" "Yes," Kethvar said seriously. "Don't do whatever you're thinking of doing right now." The ambient sound shifted, a harmonic convergence that made Marcus's teeth itch and his diplomatic training kick into overdrive. Every conversation in the chamber stopped simultaneously as a figure emerged from what had seemed like empty air. Queen Lyrale of the Zephyrian Empire glided into the chamber, and Marcus understood immediately why humans had spent the last 50 years trying to join the galactic community. She moved like poetry written in 3 dimensions, her elongated ears catching and reflecting the chamber's ambient light in patterns that seemed almost musical. Her presence commanded attention not through force, but through a gravitational pull that seemed to bend reality slightly in her direction. Marcus fumbled for his universal translator, trying to look professional while fighting the urge to stare. The device chirped cheerfully as it activated, then proceeded to broadcast his whispered observation at full volume. Holy cosmic runway model Batman. The silence that followed could have been weaponized. Every ear, antenna, sensory appendage, and whatever the light beings used for hearing swiveled toward the human delegation. Marcus felt his face achieve temperatures that probably violated several thermodynamic principles. Queen Lyrale's violet eyes found his across the vast chamber. For one impossible moment, he could have sworn he saw the corner of her mouth twitch. Then she began to speak, her voice carrying impossible harmonics that made the translator work overtime, and Marcus realized his diplomatic career had just gotten significantly more complicated. The morning briefing room smelled like burnt coffee and crushed dreams. Marcus sat across from Ambassador Elizabeth Hayes, who was methodically destroying a stylus while reviewing the previous day's diplomatic casualties. "Let me get this straight," Hayes said, her voice achieving that special pitch reserved for supervisors contemplating early retirement. "In the span of 6 hours, you managed to insult the Rigelian mating practices, suggest that the Andorian trade proposal sounded like a pyramid scheme, and somehow convince the Centauri delegation that Earth's primary export is reality television." "In my defense," Marcus said, reaching for his 3rd cup of coffee, "their courtship ritual does involve a lot of complicated dancing and expensive gifts. That's basically a pyramid scheme with extra steps." Marcus, "And technically, reality TV is one of our major cultural exports. I was being honest about our civilization's priorities." The stylus snapped in Hayes's grip. "The Rigelians are threatening to withdraw from negotiations entirely. They consider your comments a grave insult to their reproductive honor." "I can fix this," Marcus said quickly. "I'll apologize. I'll explain that human humor is basically a defense mechanism against existential terror. They'll understand. The Rigelians don't have humor, Marcus. Their equivalent emotion is what our xenopsychologists classify as aggressive contemplation." Through the viewport, Marcus could see the morning shift change on Nexus Prime's outer rings. Maintenance drones that looked suspiciously like metallic butterflies flitted between the bioluminescent support struts, while the station's living sections pulsed gently with what the briefing materials called metabolic contentment. "What about the other situations?" Marcus asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to know. "The Zephyrian cultural attaché filed a report about your interesting interpretive commentary during yesterday's opening ceremony. The good news is they didn't classify it as an insult. The bad news is they classified it as curiosity-inducing aberrant behavior." "That sounds ominous." "It means they find you fascinatingly unpredictable. For a species that values precise emotional control, that's either very good or catastrophically bad. We're not sure which yet." Marcus's communicator chirped with an incoming message. The holographic display flickered to life, showing Kethvar's silver features arranged in what might have been amusement. "Ambassador Chen," Kethvar said, "Her Majesty requests your presence at the Cultural Exchange Pavilion. Immediately." Hayes and Marcus exchanged looks. In diplomatic terms, immediately usually meant someone was either about to be honored or executed, and the odds were roughly 50-50. "Any hints about which way this is leaning?" Marcus asked. The Queen expressed interest in observing human spontaneous behavioral patterns in a controlled environment. "I believe she finds your unpredictability educational." The Cultural Exchange Pavilion turned out to be a vast biodome filled with environments from dozens of worlds. Marcus found himself walking through what appeared to be a Terran forest that seamlessly blended into a crystalline Zephyrian meditation garden, which then flowed into something that looked like the fever dream of a particularly artistic coral reef. Queen Lyrale stood in the center of it all, her elongated ears shifting almost imperceptibly as she monitored the emotional resonances of the various environmental systems. She turned as Marcus approached, and he noticed her ears tilt slightly forward, a gesture he was beginning to recognize as attention rather than annoyance. "Ambassador Chen," she said, her voice carrying those impossible harmonics that made his translator work overtime. "I trust you have recovered from yesterday's introduction. Your Majesty, I want to apologize for. Please walk with me." She gestured toward a path that led deeper into the pavilion. "I am curious about your species' relationship with humor. In our research, we have found it difficult to understand why humans use laughter to process fear and uncertainty." Marcus fell into step beside her, trying not to notice how the plants they passed seemed to respond to her presence by blooming slightly brighter. "Well, the alternative is crying, and that tends to make diplomatic meetings really awkward." To his surprise, Queen Lyrale's ears twitched in what he was learning to recognize as the Zephyrian equivalent of a smile. "Your honesty is refreshing. Most diplomats spend considerable effort concealing their true reactions." "I'm really bad at concealing things. Ask anyone who's ever played poker with me. Actually, don't ask them. They'll tell you embarrassing stories about my tells." They paused beside a small waterfall that flowed upward, defying gravity in a way that made Marcus's inner physicist weep quietly. The Queen's reflection in the impossible water looked somehow more real than she did in person. "You spoke of our appearance yesterday," she said quietly. "Your translator may have amplified your words, but the sentiment. It was not typical diplomatic discourse." Marcus felt heat rise in his cheeks. "I'm sorry, Your Majesty. That was completely inappropriate. You're very—" He gestured helplessly. "Words aren't really my strong suit when I'm nervous. You found us aesthetically pleasing. That's like saying the sunrise is pretty bright," Marcus said before his diplomatic training could stop him. "I mean, yes, but that seems inadequate." Queen Lyrale's ears shifted almost imperceptibly, and for a moment Marcus caught something in her violet eyes that looked almost like surprise. Before he could process it fully, an alarm began echoing through the pavilion. "Security alert," announced the station's AI. "Power fluctuation detected in Section 7. All diplomatic personnel please report to designated safe zones." The Queen's expression shifted instantly back to diplomatic neutrality, but Marcus noticed her ears remained tilted forward. "It appears our conversation must be postponed, Ambassador." As they headed toward the emergency exits, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that something significant had just happened, though he wasn't sure what. Behind them, the upward-flowing waterfall suddenly reversed direction, as if the station itself was reacting to whatever had just passed between them. The emergency lockdown sealed them into Queen Lyrale's private quarters with a sound like the universe's most expensive safe clicking shut. Marcus pressed his palm against the crystalline barrier that had materialized across the doorway, watching energy patterns ripple through its surface like imprisoned lightning. "Well," he said, turning to face the Queen, "this is either the most elaborate diplomatic kidnapping in galactic history, or someone really doesn't want us leaving." "The latter, I suspect." Queen Lyrale moved to a wall panel that responded to her touch by displaying cascading streams of data in symbols Marcus couldn't read. "The power grid disruption appears to be deliberate. Someone has triggered the Nexus Prime's defensive protocols." "Defensive against what?" "Us, apparently." Her ears twitched with what Marcus was beginning to recognize as her version of dark humor. "The station believes we are under attack and has sealed all diplomatic quarters to prevent, what does your species call it? Collateral damage." Marcus looked around the space that was apparently going to be his prison for the foreseeable future. The Queen's quarters defied several architectural principles he thought were universal, with furniture that seemed to grow from the floor and walls that shifted color based on ambient mood, currently a nervous purple-blue that perfectly matched his emotional state. So we're stuck here until someone figures out how to convince a living space station that we're not actually under attack. Essentially correct. The Queen settled onto something that was either a chair or a very patient alien creature. The station's consciousness operates on quantum probability matrices. It will not release the lockdown until it calculates a 97% certainty that the threat has passed. How long does that usually take? The last time this happened, the Andromedan Trade Conference was sealed for 6 standard days. Marcus sat down heavily on what he hoped was furniture. 6 days, great. I don't suppose you have any board games, cards, interpretive dance competitions. Queen Lyraleigh's ears pivoted toward him with something that might have been curiosity. You use humor to process stress. It's either that or panic, and panic tends to make me babble even more than usual. Trust me, this is the preferable option. Your species is adaptive. She gestured to the walls, which had shifted to a warmer amber shade. The quarters are responding to your emotional state. You are calming the environment simply by accepting the situation. Well, freaking out never solved anything except making me sweat through my good shirts. Speaking of which, Marcus tugged at his diplomatic uniform. Is there a way to adjust the temperature in here, or am I going to slowly cook in formal wear for the next week? The Queen touched another wall panel, and Marcus felt the air become more comfortable. Better. Much thanks. You know, for a prison, this place has excellent climate control. He paused, studying her face. Can I ask you something that's probably going to sound really stupid? I find that the questions humans consider stupid are often the most illuminating. Do those ears of yours actually? I mean, yesterday you seemed to react to things before they happened. And just now, you knew I was getting overheated before I really complained about it. Queen Lyrelei was quiet for a long moment, her ears shifting in patterns Marcus couldn't The words slipped out before Marcus could stop them, and he immediately wanted to crawl under the probably sentient furniture. I'm sorry, Your Majesty. That was presumptuous of me. Was it incorrect? What? Your assessment. Was it incorrect? Her violet eyes met his directly for the first time since they'd been trapped. Do you believe leadership requires isolation from genuine connection? Marcus felt like he was walking through a minefield made of good intentions. I think anyone who has to be on all the time, who can never just be themselves, would feel isolated, whether they're running a planet or just trying to get through a really difficult day. And what do you do when you feel isolated, Ambassador Chen? Call my sister and complain about my job until she tells me to stop being dramatic and eat some ice cream. The Queen's ears twitched and Marcus grinned. Not very royal behavior, I admit. Your sister provides emotional regulation through familial bonding and frozen dairy products. Sarah provides perspective through sarcasm and Ben and Jerry's. It's a time-honored human tradition. Marcus paused. What do you do? I maintain appropriate diplomatic composure and ensure the stability of the realm. That's not what I asked. Queen Lyraleigh's ears stilled completely. A reaction Marcus was beginning to understand meant he'd surprised her. I ensure the stability of the realm. Right, but what do you do for you? When you're not being queen of the Zephyrian Empire, when you're just Lyrelei. I am always queen of the Zephyrian Empire. That sounds really exhausting. It is the nature of leadership. Maybe, Marcus said gently, but it doesn't have to be the entirety of existence. The wall display chimed softly, and the Queen rose to check it. The station estimates another 14 hours before lockdown release. I suggest we attempt to rest. As she moved toward what was presumably the sleeping area, Marcus called after her. For what it's worth, Your Majesty, I think your people are lucky to have someone who cares enough about their stability to carry that much weight alone. She paused without turning around. And I think your people are fortunate to have someone honest enough to speak truth to power, even when trapped in a room with that power. Marcus settled back into his chair as the lights dimmed to a soft twilight. Outside the sealed quarters, Nexus Prime hummed with artificial life, and somewhere in the station's quantum consciousness, probability matrices calculated the odds of safety, while two very different people learned that isolation might be the one thing they had in common. The emergency had passed, but the diplomatic aftermath felt like navigating a minefield in a blindfold. Marcus sat in the human delegation's strategy room, watching Ambassador Hayes pace circles around a holographic display of the treaty framework that was currently more holes than substance. The Zephyrian nobles are calling for a complete restructuring of the negotiation parameters, Hayes said, her voice tight with barely controlled frustration. Apparently, yesterday's power grid incident has made them question station security protocols. That seems like a reasonable concern, Marcus offered, then immediately regretted it when Hayes's glare could have powered a small starship. The reasonable concern is that 3 separate delegations are now suggesting the humans might be better suited for preliminary observer status, rather than full membership consideration. Marcus's stomach dropped somewhere in the vicinity of his shoes. Observer status. That's diplomatic speak for thanks for coming, don't let the airlock hit you on the way out. Exactly, Hayes collapsed into her chair. We need a miracle, Marcus. Or at least a really good plan that doesn't involve you accidentally insulting anyone else's reproductive customs. In my defense, that was one time, and technically I was complimenting their efficiency. The comm system crackled to life with Kethvar's voice. Ambassador Chen, Her Majesty requests your presence in Conference Room Theta 7. There has been a development. Marcus exchanged glances with Hayes. Development, in diplomatic terms, could mean anything from breakthrough to apocalypse, usually depending on the speaker's tone. Kethvar sounded like someone trying to deliver bad news gently. Conference Room Theta 7 turned out to be a smaller chamber with walls that displayed real-time star charts. Queen Lyrale stood before a constellation map, her ears angled in a way that Marcus had learned meant intense concentration. Ambassador Chen, she said without turning around, are you familiar with the concept of political sabotage? Unfortunately, yes. It's usually what happens when my attempts at diplomacy go particularly wrong. She turned, and Marcus was surprised to see something that looked almost like amusement in her violet eyes. Your humor remains persistent. However, I refer to more deliberate sabotage. It appears the power grid incident was not accidental. Marcus felt the bottom drop out of his universe. Someone tried to trap us together. The evidence suggests a more complex motivation. She gestured to the star display, which shifted to show data streams Marcus couldn't read. The sabotage was designed to create chaos and undermine confidence in the summit's security. Being trapped together was merely collateral effect. So someone wants the negotiations to fail. Several someones, actually. My intelligence advisors have identified at least 3 separate factions with varying motivations for disrupting this summit. Marcus slumped into a chair that adjusted automatically to his posture. Let me guess, some of them are on my side of the negotiating table. Some of them are in my inner court. That was somehow worse. Your own people are sabotaging your negotiations. There exists a faction within Zephyrian nobility that believes expansion through conquest would be more efficient than expansion through diplomacy. Her ears flattened slightly. An expression Marcus was learning meant anger. They see humanity's inclusion in the galactic community as a weakness that invites further weakness. And they're probably right that I'm not helping their case for human competence. On the contrary, Queen Lyrale moved closer, and Marcus caught that subtle shift in her presence that made the air feel charged with possibility. Your unconventional approach has revealed more about the true nature of these negotiations than years of formal diplomacy might have accomplished. My unconventional approach mostly involves saying inappropriate things at inappropriate times. Yes, and in doing so, you have forced honest reactions from beings who have spent decades perfecting diplomatic facades. She paused, studying his face, including myself. The weight of that admission settled between them like a living thing. Marcus opened his mouth to respond, then closed it, then opened it again like a fish trying to breathe air. I should probably say something diplomatic here, he finally managed. Something about the importance of mutual understanding and cultural bridge building. But honestly, I keep getting distracted by the fact that you're about the most fascinating person I've ever met, and I'm pretty sure that's not supposed to be part of the treaty negotiations. Queen Lyrale's ears went completely still, that reaction that meant he'd surprised her again. Fascinating. Brilliant, actually. And funny in a way that suggests you don't let yourself be funny very often. And Marcus gestured helplessly. I'm probably about to cause another diplomatic incident, aren't I? That depends entirely on what you intend to say next. They were interrupted by an urgent chime from the room's communication system. Kethvar's voice filled the space with barely controlled panic. Your Majesty, the Andromedans are withdrawing from negotiations. They claim the security failures demonstrate fundamental incompetence in summit organization. 3 other delegations are requesting immediate transport off-station. Marcus watched Queen Lyrale's expression shift back to diplomatic neutrality, but not before he caught a glimpse of something that looked like genuine distress. Her ears tilted back in what he was beginning to understand meant she was receiving and processing multiple emotional frequencies simultaneously. Acknowledged, Kethvar. Prepare contingency protocols. The comm went silent, leaving them alone with the weight of collapsing negotiations and unspoken possibilities. I should return to damage control, she said quietly. Probably. Marcus stood, then hesitated. Your Majesty. For what it's worth, I think your approach to leadership, caring about everyone else's stability even when it costs you your own, that's not weakness. That's the kind of strength most people never manage to find. She paused in the doorway, not turning around. And I think your honesty, even when it complicates everything, might be exactly what these negotiations need. As she left, Marcus remained alone with the star charts and the growing certainty that he was falling for someone whose world he was probably helping to destroy through sheer diplomatic incompetence. The observation deck at 300 station time was supposed to be deserted, which made it the perfect place for Marcus to contemplate his spectacular failure in peace. 3 more delegations had withdrawn from negotiations. The Zephyrian nobles were calling for Queen Lyrale's abdication, and Ambassador Hayes had suggested he might be better suited for a career in interplanetary waste management. Though honestly, Marcus said to the stars, I'd probably find a way to insult the garbage and start a war with a recycling plant. Your capacity for self-deprecation remains impressive. Marcus spun around to find Queen Lyrale emerging from the shadows near the observation port. Her usual regal composure looked frayed around the edges, and her ears were angled in directions he'd never seen before. Your Majesty, I thought you'd be busy doing damage control after I helped destroy galactic civilization as we know it. The damage control is ongoing. She moved to stand beside him at the viewport. My advisors suggest that distancing the crown from the human delegation might salvage what remains of the negotiations. That's probably smart politics. Probably. They stood in silence, watching the distant stars that represented civilizations Marcus would never get to visit thanks to his diplomatic incompetence. Finally, he couldn't stand it anymore. I'm sorry, he said quietly. I know this summit was important to you, to your people, and I've basically turned it into a cosmic-scale comedy of errors. Have you? Come on, Your Majesty. I've insulted half the known galaxy, got us trapped together by terrorists, and apparently inspired a palace coup attempt. I'm pretty sure that's not what successful diplomacy looks like." Queen Lyrale was quiet for so long that Marcus began to wonder if she decided to end the conversation by pretending he didn't exist. Then she spoke, her voice carrying harmonics he'd never heard before. "Do you know what I heard when you called me beautiful yesterday?" Marcus felt heat rise in his cheeks. Probably the sound of diplomatic protocols dying in real time. "I heard honesty." Her ears shifted forward, that gesture of attention he'd learned to recognize. "For the first time in decades, I heard someone speak to me without calculation, without agenda, without layers of political consideration. Just truth. Truth that probably violated about 17 different cultural sensitivity guidelines. Truth that made me remember what it feels like to be seen as more than a political entity." She turned to face him fully. "Do you have any idea how rare that is for someone in my position?" Marcus met her violet eyes and saw something there that made his breath catch. "Probably about as rare as finding someone who thinks my diplomatic disasters are charming instead of career-ending. Your disasters, as you call them, have revealed more about the true nature of these negotiations than years of formal diplomacy. The saboteurs, the hidden agendas, the factions working against unity, they all exposed themselves trying to exploit the chaos you created. So I'm accidentally competent. You're authentically yourself, and that authenticity has forced everyone else to drop their masks as well." Queen Lyrale moved closer, and Marcus caught that subtle shift in the air that meant she was about to say something significant. "Including myself. Your Majesty." Lyrale, her voice was soft but firm. "When we are alone, when we are speaking as ourselves rather than our positions, please call me Lyrale." Lyrale. Her name felt strange and wonderful on his tongue. "Can I ask you something that's definitely going to sound presumptuous? I find your presumptuous questions tend to be the most honest ones. Are you happy? I mean really happy, not just diplomatically satisfied with the current state of galactic relations." She was quiet for so long that Marcus began to wonder if he'd finally crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. Then she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "I had forgotten what happiness felt like until someone told me I was beautiful and meant it." The admission hung in the space between them like a bridge neither of them was sure they should cross. Marcus felt the weight of civilizations and consequences, but also the simple truth of two people who had found something unexpected in the middle of a cosmic disaster. "You are, you know," he said finally, "beautiful. Not just physically, though you are that too, but the way you care about your people, the way you carry responsibility that would crush most beings, the way you listen to emotional frequencies most people don't even know exist. You're so beautiful I'm speechless." Queen Lyrale went completely still. Then something Marcus had never seen before happened. Color rose in her cheeks, a soft lavender blush that her sensitive ears immediately detected as a harmonic resonance of genuine emotion. For the first time in decades, she allowed herself to feel without control, to react without calculation. She began, then stopped, her hand rising to touch her warm cheek in wonder. "I haven't blushed since I was crowned." It's considered a sign of emotional instability in a ruler. "It's considered a sign of being human," Marcus said gently. "Or, whatever the Zephyrian equivalent is. Being Zephyrian, I suppose." They stood there in the starlight, two beings from different worlds who had somehow found common ground in honesty and vulnerability. Then the communication system crackled to life with Kethvar's voice. "Your Majesty, urgent message from the Council. The saboteur faction has been identified and arrested. 3 delegations are requesting to rejoin negotiations, and the Andromedans are asking about what they're calling the human authenticity protocols." Marcus and Lyrale exchanged glances. "Authenticity protocols. Apparently," Kethvar continued, "several species found Ambassador Chen's unconventional approach refreshingly honest. They're suggesting that future negotiations incorporate similar, genuine emotional exchange frameworks. They want to institutionalize my diplomatic disasters. They want to institutionalize honest communication, Lyreley corrected. Perhaps we should return to the negotiations, together. Together, as partners in this new approach to galactic diplomacy, as. She paused, that beautiful blush returning, friends who speak truthfully to each other. Marcus grinned. Friends who occasionally get trapped in royal quarters and accidentally revolutionize interstellar relations. Those seem to be the best kind. 6 months later, Ambassador Marcus Chen stood in the same observation deck, watching the stars and marveling at how much had changed. The Treaty of Nexus Prime had been signed, establishing Earth as a full member of the galactic community. The authenticity protocols had become a standard part of diplomatic training, and he had somehow become the permanent Earth ambassador to the Zephyrian Empire. Contemplating the cosmos again, Lyreley joined him at the viewport, her presence still making the air feel charged with possibility. Contemplating how I went from nearly destroying galactic civilization to helping save it by being spectacularly incompetent at traditional diplomacy. You weren't incompetent, you were honest. And honesty, it turns out, is a revolutionary act in diplomatic circles. Marcus turned to study her face, noting how she seemed more relaxed now, more willing to let her expressions show her thoughts. Any regrets about starting an interstellar revolution based on emotional authenticity? Only that it took me so long to realize that strength and vulnerability aren't opposites. She smiled, that genuine expression he'd learned to treasure. And that sometimes the most important diplomatic breakthrough happens when someone looks at you and simply speaks the truth. Even if that truth is, "You're so beautiful I'm speechless." Especially then. Outside the viewport, ships from dozens of worlds moved in peaceful patterns around Nexus Prime, and Marcus realized that sometimes the most important diplomatic tool wasn't strategy or protocol or careful calculation. Sometimes it was just the courage to be authentically, vulnerably, beautifully human, or Zephyrian, in a universe that desperately needed more truth and less pretense. "So," he said, taking her hand as naturally as breathing, "ready for tomorrow's negotiations with the Andromedan Trade Council. With you as my diplomatic partner, I'm ready for anything." And somewhere in the quantum consciousness of Nexus Prime, probability matrices calculated the odds of success for a partnership built on honesty, humor, and the revolutionary idea